LifeTerra is co-financed by the European Commission through the LIFE program.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Directives event, Analyzing the Packaging and Packaging Waste Regulation. What are the implications for our forests? Supported by LifeTerra. Today, we will look at the implications of the ongoing revision of the Packaging and Packaging Waste Directive, focusing on the environmental impact of packaging, especially on forests. The revision was proposed in November 2022 to fight growing waste, boost reuse and promote recycling, but also to better harmonize the regulatory frameworks across the Union. It is now being negotiated in the EU institutions and has caused a bit of a political fight between activists and industry representatives. To unpack all this and better understand what is at stake when it comes to packaging and forests, we have a great panel of speakers joining us today. So let me introduce them. We have Mattia Pellegrini, Head of Unit from Waste to Resources at the Directorate General for Environment at the European Commission, Marco Musso, Senior Policy Officer on Circular Economy and Fiscal Reform at the European Environmental Bureau, Hannah Mowat, Campaign Coordinator at FERN, an NGO created to keep track of the EU's involvement in forests, and Ulrich Leberle, Raw Materials Director at CEPI, the European Association representing the paper industry. Before we dive into our discussion, let me briefly explain the structure of the event. I will first let the speakers introduce themselves, and then we will move to some questions. I would like to ask the audience to submit their questions as well at any time. You can do so by typing the question on the chat to your right or on Slido, either by scanning the QR code, which is now on the screen, or by using the hashtag PPWR. Please also let us know your name and position so that we have a little bit of context, and you can also specify who you want to ask your question to. Now I will leave the floor to our speakers for a short introduction round. Mattia, we can start with you.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for the invitation. Indeed, we are at a crucial stage of the proposal because the two institutions are coming to the final assessment of the proposal. As you probably know, next week the European Parliament will have the vote in the plenary and therefore will agree on a common position. And the Council is likely to reach what is called a general approach by the Environmental Council of December. So if these two steps will happen, one in November next week and the other one in December, then the trialogues could start in the month of January, and to try to see if the proposal can be agreed still during this mandate before parliamentary election. Indeed, you mentioned yourself, the proposal has generated quite a lot of a debate. I would say this was, from a certain point of view, expected, because it's the first time that we have regulated the highest step of the waste hierarchy. So until now, for people which are familiar with waste legislation, we always have, let's say, regulated recycling and other type of uses like waste to energy and landfill. But this is the first time that we have targets on reuse and also targets on waste prevention, which are the two highest level of the waste hierarchy. So of course, when you introduce a totally new concept, that may generate tension. And also, I think what is important is the first time that in a very clear way we regulate the recyclability of the product. So we really have a clear condition for the design of the product to make sure that all packaging by 2030 it is recyclable. There was already in the old directive a reference to that, but it was not translated in concrete principle for economic operators, which is the case now with the regulation and an internal market legal basis. Indeed, these are maybe the last 2 points I wanted to make. One, that a big shift also, which again has generated indeed attention to the proposal, is that we have moved from a traditional approach of a directive into a regulation which is directly applicable to economic operators, and indeed is based on an internal market legal basis. So that means that it tries to harmonize for the entire Europe the conditions. I mean, in this case, mostly environmental conditions. And the second point I wanted to make, why we did it, essentially for two reasons. One, because we saw that per capita the amount of packaging was constantly increasing. So we've reached more than 180 kilograms per person per year. And this, I mean, the trend was really continuing like this according to our forecast until the 2030 and then 2050. So there was really a need of action to save our planet. And then the second reason was that in a number of areas, there were barriers to internal market and also market failures, and I can come back to that. But these were the two main drivers which led us to come up with a revision as part of the Green Deal. So maybe I stop here because I think the purpose is rather to discuss. So.
Thank you very much, Mattia. Marco, I will now leave you the floor.
Thank you, Silvia, and good morning, everyone. My name is Marco Musso. I work for the European Environmental Bureau, which is the largest federation of environmental citizens organization in Europe. Together with an even broader coalition of NGOs, we have been working on this file. Particularly, our interest is to defend and promote the solutions for Europe to genuinely address the packaging waste crisis, which, as it was introduced already by Mattia, is by all means a crisis. Packaging waste is growing much faster than GDP, so it's growing much faster than the volume of goods that are traded, showing that we have a problem, and the problem is one of over-reliance on single-use and throwaway application. So we were very interested in the Commission proposal, which puts the focus on the right place, upstream, trying to prevent the generation of packaging and tackling packaging that is unnecessary. We believe that this is where the genuine solution lie. And at the moment, at this stage of the policy process, the main concern is that under the immense pressure from some single-use packaging interests and companies, we see the proposal getting weaker by the day. The real risk is, to understand this, we need to look at the fact that we already have rules in Europe that were supposed to manage this growth of waste. This is the current directive, but these rules were too vague. There were too many loopholes, and in fact, they had no practical effect in limiting the growth of packaging waste. This is the risk now. If co-legislature, if Parliament and Council don't agree on clear rules to prevent and reduce packaging waste, the risk is to repeat the same mistake and essentially continues with the status quo, which is one, as it was mentioned, of 188 kilograms of packaging waste per person, which is projected to keep increasing over the next year. So we're very interested in this discussion and how also we can focus on genuine solution to the uncontrolled growth of packaging waste. I look forward to our discussion.
Thank you, Marco. Hannah?
Hi, thanks again for inviting us as well to this debate, which I really look forward to. I'm the mother of two small children, and I don't know if there are other parents out there who are in that Pokemon phase, but I'm right in the middle of that Pokemon phase, even though children seem to just be collecting the cards rather than actually doing anything with them. But so I'm in that sort of Pokemon phase where these characters have superpowers, and I really relate to that because something that I've believed very strongly for the 10 years that I worked at Ferner, that forests really are like a superpower in the fight against climate change. They're a superpower because they're the only technology, as it were, that is able to both store and absorb carbon dioxide at scale. And so it's really, really worrying that in the last 20 years, the European forest sink has dramatically declined by over 30% in the last 20 years, which is obviously hugely problematic in the fight against climate change, because right in the moment when we're supposed to be absorbing more CO2 and decreasing emissions rapidly, we're actually doing the opposite. Forest power nations such as Finland and Estonia have reported in the last weeks and months that their forests have now tipped over into being net emitters of carbon dioxide. So it's a really worrying time. The reasons for those, the main reason is an increased and sustained increase in harvesting, and the second are the impacts of climate change. And the foresters that we're working with are really worried about about whether they will have forests there in the future. And so we're working with them to try and promote solutions in the EU that will help them with that. And the link between the fact that forests are absorbing less and less carbon dioxide in Europe and the packaging and packaging waste regulation is the fact that about 15 to 20% of all trees that are harvested in Europe go directly into packaging. So globally, 40% of all wood is used for pulp and paper, and about half of pulp and paper is used for packaging in Europe. So that's where that figure comes from. And so the fact that packaging is projected to increase by 19% by 2030 if nothing is done will obviously have an impact on forests. At the same time, it's not just having an impact on European forests, it's also having an impact on tropical forests. We were looking at shipment data from Indonesia, for example, and in 2021, EU companies imported 1.2 billion paper straws from Indonesia. So there's been a 250% increase in the import of pulp and paper from Indonesia in the last 10 years. Brazil is the largest provider of pulp for European paper products. So it's also having an impact, increasingly so, on tropical forests and tropical lands. And this basically means that the increase that's foreseen in single-use paper products will not be to the benefit of European jobs. It's at the expense of tropical forests, and European jobs will keep declining because we simply cannot keep competing with this race to the bottom. Europe is just too expensive. We will lose that fight. So we need to think about what we use the raw material for, what we use our precious forest resources for, and how we can really add value as part of a sensible bioeconomy, including also for reusable packaging. There's no reason why European forests could not be used for reusable packaging, for example, to replace classic plastic. I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hannah. And last but not least, Ulrich.
Hello, good morning, everyone. I'm Ulrich Leberle, Raw Materials Director in CEPI. And also, thank you very much for inviting me to the panel. It is an extremely important subject for us. It is for the paper industry in Europe. I come to some of the figures that Hannah just mentioned. I think some need to be corrected, but it's true that packaging is an essential product of the European paper industry. It is crucial to address the topic. If stakeholders write to the Commission, they often mention couldn't there be unintended consequences? So it's good to address the topic, and we can see that in the Commission's impact assessment, the amount of plastic waste will increase, while according to the Commission proposal, others go down. But we need to remember that climate change, and that Hannah said, influences a number of natural disturbances that, for example, invasive species, outbreaks, insect outbreaks, storms, fires. So we need, the solution to that is really to keep the fossils in the ground and build the circular bioeconomy. And that is really the roadmap that we are having. We are building the circular economy, bioeconomy, based on forest as an initial raw material, but strongly increasing the recycling rate so that we can really broaden the raw material base in the circular economy and bringing bio and circular really together. Eurostat just published paper has a 82.5% recycling rate in packaging. So that means that all packaging do a lot of numbers of rounds coming back into the circle, serving as packaging again and again. It is not reuse, it's single use mostly, but the fiber is in the loop, and we are the main packaging material indeed. 40, a bit more than 40% in Europe is based on paper packaging. But if we take the numbers on recycling, we recycle more than all other materials together. So we are the sector that is working with nature, with being stewards of the forest, working with the forest to increase the use of bioeconomy while keeping, of course, an eye on the other forest functions that they fulfill. So, but we need to work with nature and not against nature. And working against nature would be going back into forcing the increase of fossil materials, and we need to keep them in the ground. And that is the best measure for the forests. And looking forward to our debate now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mattia, you already mentioned the purpose of the regulation, the revision of the directive. Could you go a little bit deeper into the objectives when it comes to reducing the environmental impact of packaging and packaging waste? You are muted.
Sorry. Now, pretty new compared to the old directive is that for the first time we have, as I said, the waste prevention targets and reuse targets. So as regards the waste prevention targets, indeed we have targets for 2030, 2035 and 2040. And indeed, for example, I will start with the waste prevention target for 2030, which is 5%. May seem, according to the NGOs, too low, or may seem, according to industry, too high, but in reality, that is pretty high because indeed, as it was said by Anna, the increase that we're forecasting our impact assessment of packaging from now to 2030 of all the different materials would have been 19%. So actually, when you say that you have to reduce by 5% compared to the baseline, that means a minus 24% reduction of packaging. So to put it in a simple language, means that 1 out of 4 of the packaging, which is currently placed on the market, has to disappear. I mean, so that is a major effort which will be required. And then the target will increase up to 15%. So that's in 2040. Then the second big issue, which has generated a lot of debate, is reuse. Indeed, it's the first time we regulate reuse. And we did it in 2 ways, with a number of specific targets for areas. So we didn't go, just to take it from distance. There could have been 2 different approaches. Either you have a overall reuse targets on packaging, but we thought that this would not be feasible. We went rather for an approach, as you have seen in the proposed regulation, which is to have reuse targets in areas where we believe that there can be a lot of environmental benefits, and we know that this can be done. So, for example, transport packaging, or for example, the HoReCa sector. So these are the type of areas where this is combined with an Annex 5, which has also generated a lot of discussion, which is an annex which contain a number of type of packaging which we believe are so-called unnecessary. So, for example, the miniature shampoo that you find in the hotel, or for example, the mini condiments that you can find on the table, or for example, the single use in the case of dining in. So these are a number of specific areas where the Commission proposed that indeed there are alternatives which they results in less consumption of packaging. So that was a big chapter, waste prevention and reuse. Then a second big chapter is what I consider extremely important. Unfortunately, the focus has been so much on that it has been a bit neglected in the debate, but I think it's a major revolution to make sure that all packaging material is recyclable by 2030. and then is recyclable at scale by 2035. There are also discussions there in the Parliament and the Council, but the overall objective is to make sure really that the packaging is designed in a way that it can be recycled at the end. According to our impact assessment, roughly 1/3 of the packaging placed on the market is difficult to be recycled at the end of life. So that, and indeed, that the proposal foresees not only these two targets of recyclability, but you also foreseen the definition of performance classes. So you will classify the different type of packaging according to the recyclability per packaging unit, and you will link this also to the EPR fees, so to the extended producer responsibility fees. So this, I think, is a very important component, often a bit put aside because they focus so much on reuse, but I think it's a very important, which, by the way, in this big debate, reuse versus recycling, is the evidence that once you get this one extra, actually is even assessed in our impact assessment, when you get this one extra third, which is currently not recyclable, into the recycling streams, actually the proposal will not lead to reduce recycling opportunities, as has been often written in the press, but will actually, we have estimated even by number of tons in our impact assessment, will actually give more opportunities for recycling. So there will not be any risk of dismantling recycling capacity. And then the last 2 points just to mention, one is recycled content for plastics packaging, only for that. Why? Because we saw a market failure that the uptake of recyclates in new packaging made of plastic is low. So we decided to intervene with recycled content for plastic. Of course, we didn't do it for, today we're talking about a lot of paper. We didn't do it because paper, indeed, as Ulrich said, recycling rates are already very high, so there is no need of a recycled content obligation. And then we also have specific rules for labeling, harmonized labeling, including for sorting, and also in certain cases a mandatory deposit and refund system, so DRS, notably for beverage bottles and metal cans. I mean, there are plenty of other elements in the proposal, but if I need to focus on few of the key elements, these are a few of the key elements and related objectives.
Thank you, Mattia. You already mentioned one of the main issues of controversy around this regulation, which is the reusable targets. Marco, we know that the revision is going through negotiations right now. The Parliament is set to vote on its position next week, and the vote, we can expect a rather tight vote, let's say. Could you walk us through what has happened so far, and what are the crucial points in your view as we look at the vote next week, and what do you expect it could happen?
Yes, I can try, and then it will be interesting to discuss on this. But the starting point really is the Commission proposal, and as Mattia outlined, we can debate whether it's ambitious or not, but everything that was included in the proposal would have led not to a 5% reduction of packaging waste by 2030, but close to it. And the proposal, the Commission regulation already very clearly says that all the harmonized measure, including the reuse target, including all the unnecessary restrictions of unnecessary packaging before the dilution that we've seen in Parliament, would have not been enough to reach this 5% waste prevention targets, but member states will have to do more. And this was the situation in November when the proposal came out. What we see now is that, regrettably, the European Parliament worked so far as further diluted the ambition of the proposal, introducing several exception, derogation, also for specific treatment to exclude, for example, paper packaging, which in fact have further reduced the ambition of the proposal, and it has seriously undermined its chances to actually stop the growth of packaging waste. So at the moment, next week, the European Parliament will be voting on a report that came out on out of the Environment Committee, which is, from a waste prevention perspective, from a reuse perspective, significantly weakened compared to the Commission original proposal. And what we're seeing and what we're really concerned is further attempts to go even farther in either deleting some of the restrictions of unnecessary packaging or introducing further derogation or loopholes in the reuse targets. So I don't know, we can also go a little bit more specific. We can mention, for example, one of the first victims of the negative lobbying against this proposal were the very modest reuse targets for takeaway packaging. It was a 10% reuse targets by 2030 for takeaway, and this is no longer part of the current Commission Parliament proposal. But also, and perhaps we can go into this in a moment, but also there are specific derogation for example, single-use paper products in the restrictions for unnecessary packaging. This is problematic because it really brings us farther away from a solution. And we are working hard. We are still hopeful for the vote in plenary next week. But we are aware of these pressures that are really insisting on the most important aspect of the proposal. So, as Matthias explained, this regulation is doing a lot of important work on different areas, from waste prevention to recycle content. But in terms of providing citizens with genuine solution to the packaging waste crisis, the focus needs to remain on Article 26, the reuse targets, and Article 22, which is what we're trying to do to avoid unnecessary packaging being placed on the market and becoming waste rapidly after. So in terms of the success of next week's vote, and also the success of EU decision makers in giving a solution and a response to this crisis, we would definitely start and suggest starting from whether we can say we have a solution to have even a fighting chance to revert the uncontrolled growth of packaging waste between now and 2030.
Yes, thank you so much, Marco. And focusing a little bit more on paper packaging, Hannah, we know that one of the reasons behind the regulation is the effort to reduce the overexploitation of natural resources. And of course, when we talk about paper packaging, we also talk about our trees, forests. How do you evaluate the proposed regulation when it comes to the protection of forests?
I mean, so this packaging regulation was not something that we were working on. Firm, we work on the we work on regulations to do with forest management and trying to improve forest management, and then we work on the sort of biggest pressures on forests at the demand side. And at the time, we were working mainly on bioenergy, and actually there was a sort of cry for help from the anti-plastic movement and great organizations like Rethink Plastic, who were seeing increasingly that all the things that they had been winning in terms of pushing out plastic from our systems was leading to an increase in paper packaging. And so that's why we started working on it. About half of all paper is now used for packaging. There's been an over 80% increase in the application, in the use of pulp for packaging in the last decade or so. So it is a rapidly growing sector, and I think it's something that we see every time we go out for lunch. We now increasingly are sitting in restaurants eating in paper-based bowls or paper-based plates. Throwaway cutlery, and it's a trend that we're seeing just as average consumers. So that's one of the reasons why we're working on this file. And I just want to say that we're talking a lot about paper packaging, but it's in terms of the sector that we're talking about. So mainly for the food and drink sector, it's very, in fact, never just paper. It's always mechanically laced with plastic or other chemical coatings, which have a high proportion of which have toxic chemicals, so forever chemicals, PFAS, in them, which leach into our bodies and have all sorts of detrimental impacts in terms of increased likelihood of cancer and other diseases linked to disruption of hormones. A study done recently by independent scientists showed that 32 out of 42 of the paper-based products that they were looking at were coated with PFAS, with these forever chemicals. So it's very, very rarely just paper packaging. So we're not just talking about paper packaging. We're also talking about plastic packaging, and a huge proportion of which are simply not recycled. In the European Parliament, we know very well, we drink out of a paper cup in MP's office, and it doesn't go into being recycled, it goes into being incinerated. And that's because a lot of these paper-based packaging items are hard to recycle, and that's also in the Commission's impact assessment. So yeah, those are some of the reasons why we're working on this topic.
Thank you, Hannah. And now moving towards the industry perspective, Ulrich, can I ask you, what do you think could be the impact of the regulation on the paper industry? You mentioned the importance of building a circular economy and also the importance of increasing recycling rates. So maybe could you also give us your perspective on the focus, on the attention on the reuse targets in the regulation?
Yes, certainly. So we have in paper we have an own target of further increasing recycling of packaging papers to even 90%. So that is below that is more than what is the target at a regulatory level, which we are overshooting at the moment. So we are at 82%. We want to reach 90% by 2030. And of course, this proposal here has the opportunity to really solve some of the issues that are still hindering going really over the high levels that we see already. I mean, we see, for example, Hannah mentioned certain products that are not recycled. Well, the bottleneck for this is the collection system. So this proposal here could indeed make sure that we still have better collection systems, meaning having really paper separate from other recyclables. That is what the Commission is recommending since a long time, since 2012. We had a project, Impact Paper Act, from the Commission, showing the benefits of separate collection, keeping really paper products separate from other recyclables. That is the main bottleneck. If certain flows you mentioned when they are, for example, used for takeaway food, etc., bring them into a paper collection, they will be recycled. It is absolutely what is correct is that most papers are collected and recycled. Otherwise, we would not have 82% recycling rate. So, and that is going back into paper, into papers, and that is the cycle that we are promoting. So we have a functioning closed material loop where paper is recycled back to paper products, and we do not have an open loop where we have leakage to other sectors. And so what we see as opportunity is also here to show this loop. So the risk, on the contrary, is that concepts that may work for other products like bottle-to-bottle recycling are then translated and just applied to other sectors. That would be a concern. So really, even furthermore, closing that cycle. But if I may, I also wanted to react to another statement concerning the forest. So the main raw material for packaging in Europe is paper that has been waste at a certain stage. If you put your bowl into the right bin or into the wrong bin, it is waste. So that explains why we have a lot of paper waste, 40% in the generation. But then that paper that is waste becomes a secondary raw material and is the raw material for paper making again. And in packaging overall, transport packaging, food packaging, etc., overall, more than 70% is based on recycled paper that you and I are discarding after our use. So it's a functioning cycle. And so we need to have those facts correct. Also, it is European based. So the European paper industry is actually a net exporter of paper products, and we want to remain competitive. We do not want to solve the climate crisis by closing down, but remain competitive, having products that are based on European resources, European value chains, recycled in Europe and used in Europe again, and being even net exporter for these products, because we have a lot of forests and we have a lot of experience how to manage them well. The sink has been growing in the past, and recently, indeed, because of natural disturbances and other reasons, that sink is slowing down, but it is not going into an emission. What we need to avoid are emissions, and for that we need to keep fossils in the ground and build a bio-based economy, adding value to our product. And
thank you, Ulrich. Hannah, would you like to react to what Ulrich said?
Ulrich, I like Ulrich very much. We've been working alongside each other for a number of years. But yesterday I rewatched, by some turn of unfortunate affairs, the scene when Kellyanne Conway, the chief head of staff of Trump, started talking about alternative facts. And I'm sorry, but some of the things you're talking about are just alternative facts. And it's also just a really good example for those audience out there who we can't see, unfortunately, on the screen. An example of very, very aggressive lobbying that we've had to face. There isn't a single day when we don't open our inbox when there's not some form of packaging-based industry that is selling their advertisements in Politico newsletters, buying op-eds in Euractiv, and buying events here, there, and everywhere. And CEPI, to their credit, have not been the most vocal in that, but others such as McDonald's and single-use paper cup producers, and it's very normal because, of course, they're defending their industry. But I really hope that we used to have debates around climate change where we used to have a climate skeptic and then someone who believed that climate change was happening because of humans. And I think that I hope in future years that we don't always have this sort of oppositional debate where we place these arguments on a foot by foot. It's just not true, Ulrich, that 82.5. It's possible that there is a high percentage of paper-based products that are recycled, but only 50% of those find themselves back in the loop. That's based on your own data. We don't have any other data other than the CEPI data. And the CEPI data year after year after year shows, and by the way, not an increasing percentage of it, only about 50%, just under 50% is actually finds themselves back into that loop. So please stop using this 82.5% figure. It's just simply not true.
Thank you, Hannah. I'm not sure whether, Ulrich?
If I may, just to react on that last point. So and indeed, the debates have been heating up on all sides because there is a lot at stake. And paper has improved, overshot its targets, and now suddenly there is now something that hurts that good improvement. So 82% is the recycling rate according to Eurostat. So that is not our data; that is the recycling rate from Eurostat. Then the more than 50% that we are using, that is all paper and what we use back for paper production in Europe. But that is all paper, that is printing papers, tissue papers, special papers, all kinds of papers that are partly more difficult to recycle indeed. And that explains that gap. But packaging, it has a functioning loop, and indeed other countries outside Europe are also seeking this material. Paper, before it has been China, now it's been more India and other countries. They are keen on importing paper for recycling that has been collected in Europe and that is also recycled in other paper industries outside Europe, and that explains that gap. Why we still have also more virgin material in Europe here, because indeed some of the paper for recycling is also leaving Europe because it's used by paper industries outside Europe.
Well, thank you. I know this is quite an interesting aspect of the topic. I would just like to go back 1 second to the controversy around the reuse targets and ask Mattia, what was the rationale behind the Commission's proposal of introducing also these reusable targets alongside recycling targets? Muted again.
Sorry. I think Mark already explained what was the logic. The main logic was really to not only to reach high recycling performance, but at the same time to stop the trend. So to stop the trend in the sense that even if you recycle more and more, the exponential increase, which is the link from essentially GDP, as Marco was saying, and especially if you look at the data over the last 10 years, you can really see that there has been a growth which went beyond the GDP. So beyond, as Marco was explaining, the amount of products which are placed on the market, essentially shows that there is a very fast consumption and there is also a lot of over-packaging. That's the reason why we decided that the only way to revert that trend is to also foster reuse with a number of targets, because if you have reuse, and especially if you have a well-functioning reuse system with a many rotation, then you don't need to produce many times the same packaging, but at the same time can be used many times. So take the example of as you know, we have reuse target also for beverage bottles, both for beers, but also for wines. Indeed, we recognize, for example, that for wines is more complex, and that's the reason why the target is different. But beers, if you take the German models, the German model, a bottle of beer can be reused, for years and years. And especially if you standardize the bottles, which is part of the proposal, because indeed, as Marco said, all the focus on Article 22 and 26, but there is among these articles, also a few other articles which they give power to the Commission to standardize, for example, and to build effective reuse systems. So if you have, for example, like they've done in Germany, that you standardize the shape of the bottle of beers, then you can actually reuse the bottles of all your competitors. And you don't need that, then all the transport costs also bring they're brought to zero. Then you will stop a significant amount of production of single-use, for example, beer bottles. So that is what was the logic why this was done. Indeed, in the Commission proposal, as you know, we're always when you join the Commission, the very first training, you always reminded that you should remain technologically and materially neutral. So I've always been, faithful to that philosophy, in the sense that it is not our role of the Commission to enter in a battle, of starting to accuse a given material. I see also that over years the focus has been shifting also from attention. A few years ago, the big problem was plastics. Now the big problem seems to be paper. I think what we have to look is really how do we solve problems which we have identified in the impact assessment. So, and indeed, that was the logic of reuse. Now, as Marco said, there has been a number of exemptions, notably in the Parliament. There is also, what is interesting is that these two specific articles, 22 and 26, are under a joint competence. So, joint competence in the one case of the ITRE committee and the other case of the ENVI committee. So, you have two rapporteurs which have taken, both of them have lowered the level of ambition, as Marco said, of the Commission. In one case, the ENVI committee with the report of Mrs. Rees in a certain manner, and in the other case, the report of Mrs. Toia in the ITRE committee even more compared to the Rees report. And for us, indeed, we believe that the approach should be the one we have proposed, but we see that even this exemption, they don't solve one important problem, because I will not even enter. Indeed, Ulrich is right. The numbers, the paper sector has went beyond the target of 75%. This is certified by the Commission and ISTAT in the early warning reports, which were published on the 8th of June. So it is indeed that among all the materials, it has been one which has been highly performing in terms of recycling rates, and indeed in a number of member states the target of 70% recycling target by 2025 has already been reached. But the issue is another one. The issue is that in this 80% or 82.5%, the single-use paper products are not captured. So they're not part of that. So if you don't have reuse, but then you don't even collect these products, because in most of the cases, indeed, there was mentioned the example of McDonald's, but the example they always mention of collection, as far as I know, is an example not even throughout the Italian country, but only in some cities in Italy, where they've started to have a proper collection system. But I would say that, we believe still in reuse, but really, if you have to make exemption to reuse, then they have to be linked to other parameters to say, okay, I give you an exemption, but then it has to be clear that this product has to be separately collected, it has to be then recycled, because there is no doubt that even if you have a very limited amount of rotation, so there is a lot of, has been called the battle of life cycle assessment. But let's put it, a life cycle assessment is not rocket science, it depends on a number of assumptions. But even if, let's say, we take the assumption that the rotation are not as high as estimated by the European Commission, and that indeed primary data, which are starting to be gathered from France, shows that actually the consumer is not well educated, and actually very often the rotation are very low, so the amount of times that the product goes back and forward. But even in that case, if single use is not recycled at the end, it's not separately collected and recycled, then still, even with low number of rotation, multi-use seems to perform better than single use. So I don't want to enter here in this debate, indeed, as I said, of life cycle assessment. We are also asked to the Joint Research Center to carry out an additional study based also on primary data that the industry has been submitted. We hope to finalize it as soon as possible. But the most important point I wanted to make is that to draw the attention of the co-legislator that, and especially the Parliament in this case, that okay, we believe still that the solution is reuse, because even, but if then they want to go a different direction, at least there should be clear parameters to make sure that, okay, this single use is exempted under a number of conditions, because otherwise, in many cases, and you can experience this also as a normal consumer. You go to any fast food restaurants in most of the member states, as I said, there can be exemption. What happened to the single use is that it's all collected in the same bin, and in the best case scenario goes to incineration, and in the worst case scenario goes to landfilling. And clearly this then cannot be said that he performed better than the multi-use when then it's at the end of life treatment, it's either incineration or reuse. As I said, there are exemptions, we are aware of that, but these are clearly exemptions rather than the reality in the member states, where indeed in a number of cases a collection system has been put in place. So we believe that indeed just to give exemption and not even put strict conditions which will ensure at least that this single use it is separately collected and recycled at the end could be even more problematic. So, and in any case, this will not solve the problem of exponential increase of packaging in general.
Thank you, Mattia. Marco, can I ask you to share what is your perspective on these exemptions and the possible exemptions that can come from the Parliament's vote next week?
Yes, thank you, Silvia. I will come in a second to that. I just also wanted to add perhaps an element on the discussion before, and one is very obvious, but maybe it seems this month is necessary to repeat it. The circular economy is not recycling. And I thought it was obvious. It's a little bit sad that at this point we have to explain this. The circular economy is not recycling. And it's very clear, recycling is important, but recycling on its own does not reduce waste in a context where year on, there's an uncontrolled growth of packaging waste. So this is why when some interests try to push recycling in a fake opposition to waste prevention and reuse, this is clearly instrumental. Recycling is in opposition to the other step if you're a single-use packaging producer. If your single-use packaging product is unnecessary or can be replaced by a well-designed reuse systems. Otherwise, it's perfectly complementary. And the reuse systems are and will have to be recyclable, but also, and this is perhaps an interesting element, as collection was identified as a critical point, reuse systems, they simplify collection to a dramatic point, because then you are not on the street trying to separate cigarette butts from dirty coffee cups, but reuse systems, they ensure that packaging returns to a collection point. So when at its end of life has to be recycled, after it has accomplished many rotation, you will have a lot of reusable packaging products of the same material, of the same polymer, all together in a clean stream. So this is also to show that these steps are not in opposition. So reuse is not in opposition to recycling, and it also facilitates collection. And in doing so, it happens also to solve a major problem of single-use packaging, notably in the food service, which is littering. Littering, so packaging that is thrown in our street, is not just an environmental problem. It's a cost. It's a cost on everyone, on taxpayers. It's a cost also on citizens that don't consume these products. It's also a cost on citizens that take the effort to put them in the bin. And this is a cost that is offset on the whole society for the gain of single-use packaging producers that at this point they are lobbying to get out of the measures of this regulation. And perhaps another point, because the data that were introduced about paper recycling, they're conveniently pointing at all paper packaging materials together, as this hides where the problem are, notably in the food sector, which is not coincidentally specifically where the Commission proposal focused. Because in the food sector, so this is paper-based packaging in contact with food and drinks, the situation looks much less great from a circular economy perspective. And the recycling rate there are lower, but also much lower is the possibility to incorporate recycled content. And we have actually looked at that beyond our opinion. We have conducted a study also with Fern. The study is available. Disposable paper-based food packaging, the full solution to the packaging waste crisis. And this is directly linked to the derogations and the exceptions. Because the moment that, for political reasons, under pressure from the lobby, you exempt single-use paper packaging, you are encouraging not to go up the waste hierarchy and look really at reusable solution, at prevention solution. What you're encouraging is a shift from single-use packaging made of plastics to single-use packaging based of paper. And here the boundaries keep getting more and more blurred. From our perspective, there's not an anti-plastic or an anti-paper. There has been a focus on the problem being unnecessary throwaway packaging, regardless of the material. And we would also stress, specifically in the food sector, the boundaries keep getting more blurred. As Anna mentioned, it's paper coated with plastic, it's paper coated with chemical coatings, or is multi-material. Which, by the way, was another of the area originally where we were expecting the Commission proposal to do more, simplifying packaging formats, because that would have also helped recycling. So this is just to segue indeed to the derogation. These derogations for us are clearly a result of political pressure, and as it was referred by Mattia, the IT report, this is the position of the industry committee. It really brought back to mind what Anna said. She mentioned climate deniers. These are packaging waste crisis denier, because you look at the IT report, which is very well drafted, but it's drafted reflecting a reality where we don't have a packaging waste crisis. Because what it does, and it's surprising coming from the committee that is supposed to represent the interest of industry, it deletes the targets for 2040 for reuse. This is an absurd move, because indeed company will have to undergo also an expensive transition to reuse systems. And to help them, what do? You remove the visibility in these investments by making the 2040 targets voluntary. And then also I refer to denial of the packaging waste crisis, because there is entire deletion of the measures put forward by the Commission to tackle unnecessary packaging. So, of course, there is shared competencies, but in terms of the preparation and the how close to the material reality these two positions are. There's a big difference. We really invite MEPs to look at the report, but confronted with the reality. And the reality is 188 kilograms of packaging waste per person per year.
Thank you, Marco. I will get to Hannah and Ulrich very soon, but I know that Mattia has to leave soon. So I just want to make sure that some of the questions that came through Slido are answered. We have one question by Angelo Di Mambro, ANSA News Agency, to Mattia. Some farmers' organizations say that the EU wants to ban salad in plastic bags. Is that interpretation correct? He asks. Just make sure that you unmute yourself.
Sorry. Indeed, there has been in the Italian press lots of attention to this proposal, and indeed there was a lot of focus on one of the prohibition which is contained in the proposal, which is for packaging below 1.5 kilograms for fruits and vegetables. So that's, as you can see already in the proposal of the Commission. By the way, I always recall to everybody that this proposal is a result of, the Commission is really a collegial body. So that proposal is a result of a discussion with the colleagues in DG Grow, which are in charge of industry, with the colleagues in DG Agri, which are in charge of agriculture, with the colleagues in DG Santé, which are in charge of food safety. And when it gets out, is the result of all this, because indeed it interfere with many other legislation. So that is, just to give you an example, interfere with food contact materials. So of course we need to make sure that what we do in the packaging then is also compatible with what you have under FCM, food contact materials. And indeed also we've been discussing in terms of DG Agri, and if you look at the proposal, there is this ban for packaging below 1.5 kilograms, but at the same time, the proposal itself says that the packaging can still remain if it is needed for the safety of the food. If it's needed, for example, there is the example of the turgidity of the food. There is some more thing there. Apparently, this is not considered sufficient. Indeed, the Parliament is now asking the Commission to even list to come up with a list of fruits and vegetable packagings which would be exempted. This is in the ENVI Committee report. And indeed, if as I said, the Commission will clarify that, but I think it is already clear that in a number of circumstances, the single use can be preserved, provided that it fulfill another function.
Thank you, Mattia. Another quick question from Max Drummond for you as well. Could you elaborate a little on the controversy regarding the impact assessment and the consultancy that conducted it? Does the biased agenda of the consultancy lead to any rethinking within the Commission, he asks?
Okay. No, maybe that allows me to clarify that, because we got already also internally quite a lot, not internally, but we got many emails complaining about that. So the Commission carried out the impact assessment based on a support study. This is done in every single proposal of the Commission. The way this was selected was based on a framework contract, again, like is done in most of the impact assessment. Normally you have a call for expression of interest, and then you have a list of companies which they are in this framework contract, and then the Commission make this request for services, and normally there is an independent committee with also representative of other DGs which allocate that task. Now, the controversy or the fact that indeed it has been brought to our attention was the fact that the consultancy which carried out the impact assessment, the support study for the impact assessment of the Commission has also been working for NGOs after the adoption of the proposal. We indeed investigated that, and indeed this took place after the adoption of the proposal. And so this is perfectly in line with the rules of the framework contract, which foresee that the consultancy of course, cannot work for any other players during the impact assessment stage, so during the elaboration of the proposal. But we understand that all these contracts which have been put in place took place after the adoption of the proposal, so when the non-compete clause was not available. But this being said, as I said myself, and I prefer to always be open to that, in the sense that the life cycle assessment, it is not rocket science. It's not like you have a scientific phenomenon that you describe and then you come to a physical rule of that scientific phenomenon. It's based on a number of assumptions. But I think 2 points I would like to make are the following. One is that it is true that Article 4, Paragraph 2, which is an important paragraph of the Waste Framework Directive, clearly says that if the Commission wants to deviate from reuse, he has to demonstrate this via life cycle assessment, and then we can go to recycling. So but the article doesn't work in the other way around. It doesn't say that in order to impose a reuse target, the Commission has to demonstrate with a life cycle assessment that reuse is better than recycling. If you read the article says exactly the opposite. Reuse by default is considered better, but the Commission can deviate and have recycling as a target, provided that is better from a life cycle point of view. And also the second point I wanted to make is that, and I think Marco made also that point, it was very good, we really tried, and we still believe enormously in recycling. So really I want to make that point, because it has been really unfortunate that this at the end became a battle between reuse and recycling. The Commission believes that recycling is an important pillar of circular economy, but equally reuse is also an important pillar. And is actually a complementary pillar to achieve waste reduction, which could not be achieved unless you have reuse targets. And we tried, because I think the impact assessment, indeed, as you said, that there has been criticism, and I'm not surprised about this question, but there is at least one thing that has to be recognized. The Commission did not come with a flat, as Marco was mentioning, target on reuse. We came with a very tailor-made approach. So we've been looking to different sectors. Take the example of pallets that nobody speaks about. Do you think it's normal that half of the pallets currently on the market where you transport your goods are single use? So that means that they're handed to the final consumer, and then you stay with the pallet. And I can tell you, I had experience myself. I mean, I made before the summer break an order of wines with a group of friends, and then suddenly I was delivered that order of wine, and the pallet I was left alone with the pallet. And I tried in every way to reuse that pallet, right into even reuse companies that then they start to say, no, but it's not part of our let's say portfolio, therefore we cannot take it back. So at the end, the only solution was to bring it back to a collection center, a communal collection center. And we know that pallets can go up to 100%. You can have a perfectly closed loop where you reuse all the pallets and they can last very long. So these are the approach we have taken. And the same applies to food for the reason that Marco was saying. So I think we, regardless of this, let's say, this criticism of the impact assessment, I think there was a rather, would you say, constructive approach on the Commission side to really focus on area where we saw, based on existing examples, because indeed the other half of the market, for example, for pallets, function very well with reuse, and there is even a consortium and all of that. We are focused in that areas where we believe that can really be key to achieve these reduction targets and to bring environmental benefits. So that's, and this is clearly, if you take all the sectors together, there is clearly a number in our impact assessment which shows all the environmental benefits which will be generated.
Thank you so much, Mattia. Thank you also for participating to this event. Let's go back to another question from the audience. We have David Ellison from ETH Zurich. He says, discouraging the practice of forestry will simply further reduce the forest-based carbon sink because it undermines incentives to invest in the forest. But of course, the way to go is to further improve the recycling strategies, not stop the use of forest products. I also worry a lot about reducing European forestry practices because the result will be significant increases in forest product imports from the rest of the world, which just further promote the deforestation of primary forest. Maybe, Hannah, you want to comment on this question?
Yeah, sure. And I'm actually really intrigued because I was also going to cite a study that was released actually yesterday from ETH Zurich, which showed that the number one solution to absorbing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere was actually to let forests restore and protect them. So I think that there's a little bit of silo thinking within ETH, and it'd be really great if you could go and speak with your colleagues, because at least those are the facts and figures that are coming out yesterday. I want to get back to basics. The EU has climate targets. We're trying to reduce emissions. As part of that, we have a LULUCF target. The LULUCF target is trying to increase removals. And currently, the EU forest sink is rapidly declining. And so I want to come back to something that is often said, which is that, you know, what we're really trying to do is stop emitting fossil fuel emissions. And obviously, we're trying to stop fossil fuel emissions, but at the same time, if that's being cancelled out by a massive decline in the forest carbon sink, then they just cancel each other out. And I'll end with a small anecdote from one of the leading NGO experts in forest and climate in Finland, Hanna Aho, who said to me that when she was recently in Brussels to talk about the huge pulp mill that's just opened in Finland, which is going to increase harvesting and further tip the Finnish forests into emitting CO2, which is what they're currently doing already. She said, "Well, what my job at the moment is to say that Finland actually has done nothing to progress against its climate targets, because since 1990 it has indeed decreased its fossil fuel emissions from the ETS sectors, but at the same time it's led to such a massive decline in the forest carbon sink that actually it all levels out, and actually the emissions are at the same level. So I think it's really important to not juxtapose these things. Obviously, reducing fossil fuel emissions are hugely important, but it's also important to do that at the same time as increasing storage, which we don't talk about enough, and absorption levels in forests, which, according to experts at ETH released yesterday, 61% of the solution comes from protecting and restoring forests and not planting trees. So, thanks.
Yes, thank you. Hannah, just another question still from the chat for you. There are bio-barriers available and the industry is focusing on this, says Maria Rita Mandel, Senior Analyst at Valmet. I would be more worried about microplastics and water and chemical usage when washing reusable plastic cutlery, for instance, in fast food restaurants. Would you like to react to this?
I'm afraid I'm not an expert in microplastics or this. What I do know is that independent studies have shown that in about 2/3, so 32 out of 42 products, but in about 2/3 of applications of single-use paper-based products, which are coated with chemicals or with plastic, has been proven to have impacts on human health as a result of the forever chemicals that they're coated with. So that's all I can say.
Thank you so much. Ulrik, I don't know if you want to react on anything that was said so far, but I would also like to ask you, what are your expectations from the upcoming vote and the negotiations ahead?
Yeah, thank you. So on your last question, what we of course also follow the debate very closely. We have seen that there are moves that are taking approaches that might help in materials, but are difficult to understand for other material. I'm speaking about, for example, something that has been added in the ENVI report, which is this requirement for a closed product loop recycling. That we hope that members of the European Parliament do understand that we have to look at different materials in different ways, depending on where there is a functioning material loop and where a more closed loop is necessary, but don't apply it to all materials. That is about recyclability. Then indeed on the single use versus reuse debate still. So indeed we have proposals that have been made to really justify where the single-use alternative is better. Targets could be reduced if we have functioning loops. Their proposals have been made, and there we also hope that this understanding gets through. The Commission has already also introduced such exemptions based on when it comes to business transaction with regard to cardboard, because that is absolute functioning loop. So based on that, exemption has been made for a good reason. And similarly, as Mattia explained, that could be an approach to look at what are really the circularity that is achieved. Of course, it has to be justified. There I'm absolutely with you. So then on things I heard in the last couple of minutes, I think the circular economy, we must see it as not only limited to packaging. Packaging is there for a reason. Packaging is there to protect goods from being wasted. So we cannot just look at packaging and look at that number of packaging that is increasing when we have less packaging or less performing packaging. We have goods, we have food that is that will be wasted more. So it is part of a system, and so that is why it is. Of course, a focus. The Commission has made a proposal on food waste, where packaging plays a role. And you need to look at it as a system. Other topics need to be also addressed. I think Marco mentioned littering. I myself live in the center of Brussels. If I go out on a Sunday morning, of course I'm annoyed but by the littering that I see in the streets, and that are collection problems really, and making people aware that the materials that they use, they are important materials to be reinserted in the economy. There's a lot of education work to be done, but the littering is of course annoying. But if we look at the massive amounts also of transport packaging that are not even seen by you and I as consumers, we have absolutely functioning loops. Food packaging for takeaway in paper that is indeed a minor amount, and health issues are taken very seriously in paper, and there are less alerts than compared to other materials. But the question of chemicals needs to be addressed in future REACH revisions. It's not a paper specific issue. So I think, and then finally also multi-material. I think that is addressed in the Commission proposal. By the rules for design for recycling, so that in the different sectors, indeed, we come to different recyclability assessments, and multi-material also needs to be assessed to make sure they will be recycled just as as the mono material and other packaging materials as well. That just as a few points I wanted to react to. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Ulrich. I see that Mattia is still here, so I will just take advantage of this to ask a final question to him. Mattia, do you expect the file to be concluded before the end of the term? Is this a realistic expectation?
I mean, I mentioned that it is difficult to foresee now, in the sense that there are two steps in between. So the first step is to make sure that the two institutions, they reach, in one case, the plenary vote in the Parliament and a general approach in the Council. Normally, the plenary vote, except really unforeseeable situations, will take place next week. And indeed, then another thing will be, and this no one knows, what will be the final outcome of the vote in the plenary vote, notably on Article 22 and 26 and also Annex 5. So that's for sure there will be a vote of the Parliament, to be seen what will be the final outcome of that vote. Then this should be seen in conjunction with the objective of the Spanish presidency to reach a general approach in the Environmental Council of December. I can tell you that the work is going rather progressing rather faster. There is even this week, on Friday, there is another working party of environment. So I would expect that both steps can take place. If these two steps, they take place as foreseen, then indeed early January, the Commission, the Council and the Parliament can start the trilogues, and that then indeed leave us with a very tight calendar, because indeed there will be the recession period that should start at the latest in March. This is our understanding, but we also understand that there may be exemption that the Parliament may decide to grant, in the sense that if a file is very in an advanced stage, maybe the Parliament will decide to continue to work on the file even if the elections are approaching, in order to complete that. But I mean, it's too early to judge that. But overall, if we have enough trilogues, both political and technical, which are organized, it could be feasible in our assessment to complete the file within the current term. At least that's. We also know that the Belgian presidency would like to treat this file as a priority file under the Belgian presidency, so that shows that there will be continuity with the Spanish presidency, which has been put a lot of focus on that file. So I think there will be a lot of work, but at the same time, the conditions are there for maybe concluding within this term.
Thank you, Mattia. Indeed, a lot will depend on the upcoming vote next week. Directive will follow that and continue to cover the regulation. Thank you so much to all the participants and the speakers for taking part in today's event. Thank you to those who have been following us as well and asking questions. And thank you to Life Terra for supporting today's program. Thank you so much. Have a nice day.
Life Terra is co-financed by the European Commission through the LIFE program.